So this is a picture of Justin Willman, and he is a magician, a comedian, and a TV host. Most notably, he has a Netflix special called Magic Tricks for Humans. He just goes out into public and does tricks for people and kind of wows them with his magician abilities. He started doing card tricks when he was 12 years old because he broke both arms, and his orthopedic surgeon encouraged him to learn card tricks to get dexterity back in his hands. And he's been doing magic ever since. And here's one trick that he does with a Rubik's Cube. We grabbed this off his Instagram page. Go ahead and take a look.
Rubik's Cube. Jar. Cork. Okay. Bag. Paper bag. Bag. Empty. Empty bag. Empty bag. Jar goes in the bag. Okay. Cube goes in with the jar. Oh. Oh, yeah. That is ridiculous. Oh.
How does he get the cube in the jar? I mean, if you were to look at the jar more closely, it's a round top, and the Rubik's Cube is bigger than the round top. How in the world does he do it? Some of you were totally unimpressed. Your faces were like, "Yeah, I've seen better. I've seen better." And some of you were just like, how does he do it? Like, I love a good magic trick. I love a good magic trick because magic in some ways incites awe and wonder, and it's like, whoa, how do they do it? But it also brings some measure of curiosity and confusion. Any good magic trick and any good magician will always incite the question, how did they do that? And leave you in some ways confused, which means sometimes we actually like being confused because sometimes we welcome confusion in our life as entertainment. It's not just with magic tricks, but you can also think of it in terms of a good mystery story, whether it's a novel or a movie, and there's all these twists and turns, and there's suspense, and you're not sure who did it or what's going to happen, and then at the end there's this big reveal, and you were surprised because you thought it was going one way, and it went in a completely different direction. Sometimes we welcome confusion as entertainment, not just with movies or magic tricks, but also with puzzles. This is a puzzle that we have in our house. We were avid puzzlers during the pandemic. Anybody else? We were doing puzzles like nobody else's business. And we got bored with regular picture puzzles, so somewhere along the way, my wife and I came across this puzzle, Just Color, a fade from gray to black. And I dumped out the pieces. I did the whole edge, and I was like, I'm going to conquer this thing. And after about 10 minutes, I was so confused. I didn't know what was up and what was down, and I abandoned it altogether. But my wife was determined, finished the puzzle, and now we have it actually framed in our home in a stairwell, right? It's like, but we welcome confusion at times as entertainment because it just exercises some capacity of our mind. But then there are other times when confusion is overwhelming and disorienting. And then when you combine seasons of grief with that confusion, it just compounds the distress that we feel. I had a conversation with just somebody this week who was needing to work through the decision of whether or not they would take a family member from life support at the hospital. I mean, grief was already present because of the critical condition their family member was in, and then they have this confusing decision. Is this the right thing to do? Do we take them from life support and just let the natural course take its way? When confusion and grief come together, it can be overwhelming and paralyzing. And if you're in a place this morning where you're feeling confused about your future or something in life, or there's some measure of grief that's overwhelming you, Easter and the resurrection is good news for you. My hope is that you can hear the good news of Easter. But where the first Easter morning began was in that place of confusion in grief. Because what we've already read this morning is that Mary goes to the tomb where Jesus' body lay, hoping to anoint him with spices and oil. And once she arrives at the tomb, she sees the stone has been rolled away. She looks inside to find that Jesus isn't there. She immediately goes and runs to the disciples to tell them what she has found. And after they come back, it says they looked in and believed, but still, verse 9 says they didn't understand. They believed Mary, they believed the body wasn't there, but they still didn't understand. And then Peter and John leave the tomb. Mary is there outside the tomb by herself. And what we read, jumping into verse 11 of chapter 20 of John, is that Mary is grieving. Verse 11, now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. And they asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" Now, what John is doing here in this part of chapter 20 is he's highlighting the fact that Mary is grieving and distraught, because 3 times in verse 11, 12, and 13, John highlights that she is crying. He highlights her emotional reaction to the absence of Jesus' body. It says in verse 13 or verse 11 that she was crying, again in verse 11 that she wept, and then the angels ask her, "Why are you crying?" The emotional whiplash that she and the disciples have experienced over the last few days is staggering. Because at the beginning of the week, Jesus rides into Jerusalem, being hailed King of the Jews, riding through streets lined with people waving palm branches, laying cloaks on the road for him, saying, "Hosanna in the highest, our King is here." But then by Friday, he is strung up on a cross as a criminal with no evidence of any crime having been committed. And now the body is nowhere to be found. I would imagine that for Mary, going to the tomb that morning to anoint Jesus' body with spices and oils was wildly significant and important. One of the things that funerals do for people once a death has occurred is that funerals bring comfort and they bring closure. They bring comfort because hopefully the family who is grieving the loss of this loved one is surrounded by other people who care for them and can support them. It also brings closure because now you have the finality of we are actually putting this person to rest. They are now gone. And you find that grieving rituals in Jewish culture are very significant. If you go into the Old Testament, you can find examples of people grieving from anywhere 7 days on to 30 days when they lose a loved one. And even in Jewish culture now, they have this ritual called Shiva, where they literally sit for 7 days in their home. And people come to them and visit them and bring them food, and they just sit and they gather together and they grieve and mourn. But for Jesus, there was no funeral. There was no gathering of a community to share stories. There were no meals being offered. There was no closure for those who followed him. So Mary goes to try and provide some closure to this death, and now the body is missing. Not only is Mary grieving, Mary is also confused. Because she says to the angels, after they ask her, "Why are you crying?" Verse 13, "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." Now, what's interesting about this moment, almost humorous, is that Mary has zero reaction to the angels. Zero reaction. I mean, these are celestial beings from heaven, sometimes glowing white, sometimes looking very strange and otherworldly. And most of the time when angels visit people on earth, especially in the Gospels, people come undone and they lose their minds. If you were to go to Luke 1 and 2, there are 3 visits to 3 people by angels. You have Zechariah, who's serving in the temple, Mary, who's in her bedroom, who's just told that she's going to be the mother of the God of the universe, and then the shepherds tending sheep out in the fields at night. An angel comes to visit each of them, and we're told that they're gripped with fear. They're terrified. They're deeply troubled. But here, Mary has zero reaction to the angels. She just wants to know, where is Jesus' body? And not only does she have no reaction to the angels, she actually can't even recognize that Jesus is standing right beside her. Verse 14, at this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Mary is so overrun with grief and confusion that she can't even process reality, which isn't uncommon for people who are experiencing deep grief, who are confused by their grief. It is really hard to make sense of reality. This is a picture of a woman named Joanne Didion. And back in around 2006, 2007, I think, she wrote a book called The Year of Magical Thinking. It's a memoir of her telling her story of how she processed the grief of losing both her husband and her daughter within a span of about 18 months. Her daughter got sick with something that seemed to be a flu or an infection. They took her to the hospital. She was in intensive care for an extended period of time. Eventually, she got better, and they were like, oh, so relieved. A few days after she got out of the hospital, her husband falls over from a heart attack and dies. A few months after her husband's passing, Joanne and her mother and her daughter are traveling, and they come to LAX airport where she collapses, is taken to the ER to find that she has a brain tumor, which ultimately would take her life. And in her memoir, she talks about how grief can derange the mind. And people who are experiencing grief can go through intense confusion and not know how to make sense of what is real. She says sometimes they can think as though the person they loved and lost is still with them, and maybe through their own childish thinking, she says, can actually change the outcome of events and bring them back. She tells the story in her book how when she got to the point where she was trying to finally clean out her husband's closet and donate all his clothes, she couldn't get rid of a pair of shoes because she found herself thinking, well, he is going to need a pair of shoes if he returns. See, grief can overwhelm you to the point that it causes you to lose focus on reality and not even process life the way that it actually is. And I wonder if anybody here has ever been there before. You've ever been in a season that is just so heavy, so overwhelming. You're like, I just can't make sense of life. And you don't even have the ability to see that Jesus is present with you in your grief. Because what we find in this moment, the good news of the resurrection, is that even in our darkest days, Jesus is present with us. And what changes things for Mary, the thing that causes her to see clearly, is when Jesus calls her name. Verse 16, it says, Jesus said to her, Mary. He speaks her name, and for the first time, she snaps out of her grief, right? This isn't the first time that Jesus has spoken to Mary. Up to this point, he's actually asked her two questions. Who are you looking for? Why are you crying? But there's something about the fact that Jesus says Mary's name that cuts through her grief. It cuts through her confusion. It gets her attention, and she is able to know that she is seen in that moment. It's as though Jesus saying her name communicates to Mary, I see you. I feel what you're feeling. But Mary, take heart. A new reality is unfolding. Something new is happening right here, right now. Don't miss it. And if you're in that place this morning where you're overrun with grief and confusion, I believe that Jesus is present with you and he's speaking your name. And he's saying to you, I see the failure that you're experiencing. I know the disappointment that you're walking through. I can feel the rejection that you are feeling, but there is something new happening right under your feet, right now. Don't miss it. Don't lose sight of it. And this is why the resurrection is so essential to our faith, because it reminds us, even in our darkest hour, even in our worst moments, there is hope. The resurrection gives hope in the midst of our grief. And in this moment, when Jesus says Mary's name, it's like a whole new world opens up for her. Jesus says her name, and then we read, she turned around and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. And what we see is she has a whole new perspective about reality happening at this moment. And what the resurrection does for us is it brings three things. The first is that the resurrection brings comfort to our grief. We live in a world overrun with grief. We live in a world overrun with brokenness. We live in a world overrun with despair. We will all hit hard times. We will all walk through suffering. Jesus says it himself in John 16 before he goes to the cross. In this world, you will have trouble. And when we have trouble, the thing that we often want more than anything else is somebody with us in it. And what the resurrection does is it reminds us that Jesus is present with you even when you can't see it. I've been a pastor for about 20 years, and the first couple years of life and ministry were just really, really hard, really excruciating, some of the most difficult years of my career, to the point where I was like, should I even do this anymore? We walked through a church split, which led into another church split, and through the course of it all, I found myself in counseling, as you would expect. And one day I'm sitting with my counselor, and I'm talking about not only the season of life that I'm in, but also what seminary was like and how I found myself in this class with this professor that I loved and adored, but I wanted his approval more than anything else. I took 2 years of classes with him, got to know him personally. He had students in his home. We traveled with him, got to hear him speak in other places, and I wanted more than anything to receive his approval and admiration, and I felt like I was always missing it. I never got it. And then we started talking about the season of ministry I was in, the difficulty, the brokenness that I was feeling, and this desire to be affirmed and accepted by this senior pastor who had hired me, who is having all of these problems with this church, who left the church to start another church. And I felt like constantly, for about 5 or 6 years, every time I was looking for approval and affirmation, I couldn't find it, and I just start to break down and cry. And then he asks me this question about my dad. He just says, so what is the relationship with your dad like? And my tears just get that much more intense. And what he's thinking in this moment is that there's this brokenness, this pattern of brokenness that extends all the way back to my dad. I didn't get approval from my dad, didn't get approval from this professor, didn't get approval from this pastor. And he's like, you have a wounded relationship with your dad, don't you? And I said, no. It's the exact opposite. My dad is an amazing man. He has been constant and present my entire life. He does nothing but speak words of affirmation to me and approval. Like, what I realized in that moment was that everything I was looking for in this relationship with the professor or this guy who hired me, like, I already had in my dad. It was already present in my life. I just didn't have eyes to see it. And what the resurrection does for us is it reminds us that there is love, that there is mercy, that there is grace. There is someone present with you even in your hardest moment, even when you can't see them, even when you have lost sight of them. They are there, and his name is Jesus. The resurrection gives us hope because it brings comfort to our grief, because Jesus is present, because he's alive, he's well. He's up in heaven at the right hand with the Father. He has given us his Spirit to mediate his presence to us continually. And we have comfort through his presence everywhere we go. The resurrection gives comfort to our grief. It also gives clarity to our confusion. Now, if you're confused this morning, the resurrection is not going to be like a magic 8-ball that gives you all of life's answers when you're unsure what to do. But what the resurrection does is it anchors us to a bigger story. See, everybody is looking for some sort of story to guide them through life, to help them make sense of reality and send them on a trajectory so that they know they're doing something significant and important with their life. In our culture, oftentimes the stories that win out are the stories of success and achievement. If I can just prove something to somebody that I can do this thing, then my life will be worth living. Or it's the story of power and glory. If I can just get to the top and win and be recognized, then I will know that life has meaning. Or it's the story of wealth and status. If I can just show people that I'm significant by what I own, people will be impressed by who I am. The problem with those stories is that all along the way, they constantly fail and disappoint and don't deliver. Oftentimes, people get to the top of those mountains to find that there is nothing there. And what the resurrection does for us is it anchors us to a larger story that has a very different end. Not one of personal glory, recognition, power, or status, but a story that ends in new creation, of all things being made new. That's why we read in Revelation, John, the same guy who wrote the Gospel of John, has this vision of at the end of time, a new heavens and a new earth. Jesus seated on the throne in heaven, saying, "Behold, I am making all things new. There will come a day when there is no more death, mourning, crying, suffering, or pain. The old order of things has passed away, and a new reality is unfolding for us." And that means the resurrection brings comfort to our grief, it brings clarity to our confusion, and it brings new creation to our brokenness. It brings new creation. The fact that something new is coming, and in part, it's already here. Jesus is trying to communicate this to Mary after she realizes, oh, Jesus is alive. Here he is. He's right in my presence. Jesus says to Mary in verse 17, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father, to my God, and your God." Now, it might sound like Jesus is saying, hey, I need a little personal space here. Don't hold on to me too tight. I just came back from the dead. I need to shake off some things, okay? But what he's trying to communicate to Mary is like, hey, there is a new reality. I have to return to the Father. And it's almost as though he's saying, don't hold on to me. And in saying that, he's saying, we are not going back to the way things used to be. Anybody here ever have moments that are like, oh, if I could just rewind the clock and go back to 2005. Some of you here are old enough to think, like, if I could just go back to the 60s, right? It's like Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite, those who have seen those movies. All he wants to do is go back to the 80s and throw a football over that mountain. Sometimes we think our best days are behind us, and what the resurrection reminds us is that the best days are still to come. That we do sit in a world right now where pain and suffering and death seem to win out. But Jesus is making all things new. So if you're in a season of confusion, if you're in a season of grief, the resurrection reminds us that everything will be okay. I have this clip of Tim Keller that I want to show you. He's been one of the more influential pastors in my life in ministry. He passed away in 2023 after a battle with cancer. And in the last couple years of his life, I mean, he kind of knew he was coming to the end. He didn't know how much time he had. But you could tell as he was doing public appearances, as he was going on podcasts and just talking about his life, he was reflective of his whole life in ministry and what's to come for him and how the resurrection was guiding him and what he knew was his final days. So I want to show you a clip of him on the Russell Moore podcast and what he said about how the resurrection is impacting what he's thinking about for his last few years before he passed. Go ahead and take a look.
Let me just say something that Kathy and I have talked to each other about in the last year. If Jesus Christ was actually raised from the dead, if he really got up, walked out, was seen by hundreds of people, talked to them, if he was raised from the dead, then you know what? Everything's going to be all right. Whatever you're worried about right now, whatever you're afraid of, everything is actually going to be okay. Because you got to remember, we're not just talking about resurrected people. Jesus Christ is, and this is where Christianity is unique, we're talking about a resurrected world, meaning there's plenty of other religions that talk about a future afterlife, which is a non-material world. In other words, you get a consolation for the world we've lost. Christianity says it's not just your bodies are being resurrected, but the world is actually going to be a material world that's cleansed from all evil and suffering and sin. And if Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, then the whole world is going to be, in a sense, resurrected. And everything is going to be okay. Everything.
That is the hope that I cling to. It is the hope that fuels me from one day to the next. I believe deep in my bones, more than I believe anything else, that because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, no matter what you're facing today, no matter what you will face tomorrow, everything will be okay. Because Jesus is present with you in your pain, your suffering, your trial, and your grief. His story is guiding our life to a good and better end that nobody has the ability to write except for God himself. And he is in the process of making all things new. The resurrection gives hope in the face of grief. So if you're here this morning, if you are stuck in grief, know that this grief you are experiencing is not the end. If you're in a season of trying to figure out and make sense of our world, know that Jesus is present with you. And if you are in need of a fresh start and trying to figure out how to revamp life, know that with God, all things are possible. If he can raise a man from the dead, he can extend new life to you, and he can rewrite your story. So may you know that the resurrection gives hope to our grief. And if you're in it, there is a day that's coming when all things will be made new. Lord, we thank you so much for this good news. And I pray for those who are here this morning who need to really hear and receive and believe this good news, that it would sink deep in their heart, that they would be able to cling to the hope that we have in you, and they would know that in the days to come, we can rejoice even in our suffering. We can have hope even in grief, because we know that a new and better day is being brought forth by you. We love you and pray this in your name. Amen.